Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Doc Talk. I'm Dr. Sheila Wijayasinghe.
And I'm Dr. Shazma Mathani.
A special thank you to our episode sponsor, Figs. So obviously in our line of work, you kind of live in your scrubs. And if you follow us on Instagram, you probably already know this by now, but we're obsessed with Figs. They're super comfortable, breathable, durable, and they actually fit, which is just a huge upgrade from the horrible itchy scrubs that were once the status quo for so long. They're also just super cute and stylish, and you just feel really good wearing them.
Like Sheila said, we are obsessed. But you know what I love the most about Figs? They just get what it's like to work in this field. It's not just that they know what we need, like 7 pockets to carry all of our stuff on shift, but they've also built this incredibly supportive community of people who want to have important discussions and make real connections with other people who work in healthcare. I've had the opportunity to go to some of their events, and they've done such a good job, and it's so refreshing for a brand to show up in such a real way. And you guys, if you're not already following them on social media, the memes are hilarious. If you work in healthcare or know someone who does, or more recently, they have a bunch of loungewear that you can use if you're not a healthcare worker as well. Figs is it. Go to wearfigs.com and use code FIGSDocTalk, that's FIGSDOCTALK, to get 20% off your first order. That's wearfigs.com, code FIGSDocTalk.
So today we're diving into one of the most confusing and anxiety-filled parts of raising kids. I know this was a big struggle for us and it continues to be. So feeding your kids, from starting solids and baby-led weaning to picky eaters, supplements, added sugar, ultra-processed foods. Parents are always bombarded with advice that often contradicts what we say in practice. So we want to cut through the noise and give you evidence-based information that you can actually use. So we've invited Nita Sharda from Happy Healthy Eaters to help us unpack the science, tackle the biggest myths, and share practical strategies for every stage of childhood eating.
I'm so excited to welcome Nita Sharda here. So she is a registered dietitian, recipe developer, and co-founder of Happy Healthy Eaters. Many of you probably already follow them on Instagram at Happy Healthy Eaters, where she supports families with practical, evidence-based nutrition guidance. She's a graduate from the University of Manitoba's Human Nutritional Sciences program and dietetic internship, and has built a diverse practice in spanning everyday wellness, pediatric nutrition, and family feeding. Her early food memories and community involvement continue to shape her work. As I mentioned, you can find Nita sharing approachable nutrition tips and nourishing recipes on Instagram at Nita_Sharda or at Happy Healthy Eaters. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
We're excited to have you. It's always so nice because you're located in Winnipeg. Shaz is in Edmonton. I'm in Toronto. Big affinity for Western Canada as well because I'm originally from Edmonton. So it's so nice to have you. I follow you and your colleague who do this together, and it's been so helpful in our own journeys. So how did you start your journey in this space, Nita?
Yeah, you know what? A lot of people don't know this about me, but I spent about 10 years in long-term care. So it's really interesting to all of a sudden be on the other spectrum of, the life stage, essentially. And so I kind of fell into this when I had my first son in 2017, and I was all set to start solids. And I went to a public health seminar. It was on, starting your baby, first foods. And it was actually led by a professor of mine who's also a registered dietitian. And the information was really great. It felt really straightforward, a bit of a recap on some of the courses that I had taken in university. But then when I came home, I still felt so lost. Like, how do I feed my baby? I have Indian food. Can I give him roti? Can I give him butter chicken? What about masala? Like, what do I need to change about this? And so I felt really, really lost. And at that time, and I'm sure the both of you remember, baby-led weaning was really starting to pick up momentum, but there wasn't that really like clear cut and robust research around, is this safe? Is this an appropriate feeding method? And I kind of just decided to follow my own intuition and my baby's cues. And he really wanted to be much more interactive with food. And so that was what sort of led me on this journey of exploring childhood nutrition. And I've become really fascinated by the first 1,000 days and how that can impact long-term health. But really, it was sort of the lack of or absence of culturally sensitive information that really felt relevant for me.
Yeah, I'm glad that you say that because it's 3 South Asian women here having this conversation. I ate very differently as a child compared to like all of the kind of evidence and trends, as you mentioned. We are going to talk about baby-led weaning off the top here, but just all of this other additional information that we are hearing as parents and trying to like figure out how to, have the cultural aspect where I want my kids. And I'm so my kids are biracial. So like my husband's family is like not the cultural aspect isn't as strong, I would say. And so, like trying to kind of balance all those things. I did do baby-led weaning with both of my kids. So I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about that. And then also even just like my parents were like, well, you have to finish your plate. I'm like, well, no, we're actually not going to do that. Like we eat until we're full. And like even just trying like that tension and trying to manage that all the time. So I'm really excited to have you here to like talk about that and have that cultural context in as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think those are all tricky and challenging things we've all kind of gone through. And it's easy to kind of maybe think about practicing in the same way that our parents did. But the beautiful thing is we get to kind of rewrite the narrative and come up with a different way of feeding and striking a balance that really works for each family. And it's even though the three of us are South Asian, we probably all take a slightly different approach, but we all have the same goals. We all want to raise quote unquote happy, healthy eaters, but we're going to do it a little bit differently.
Nice add of your tag there. I like that. We did not do baby-led weaning in our home. And so this is interesting. We had very different approaches. My parents also focused on emptying the plate, and they still do with the kids. I'll like follow them around with a spoon sometimes of the last couple bites of food. So this is something I'd like to get into later on. But when parents are just starting out, Nita, what exactly is baby-led weaning, and what does the evidence say about its benefits and risks compared to traditional spoon feeding?
I mean, right off the hop, I just want to mention that both ways of starting your baby on solids are wonderful. I think the big takeaway for parents is to recognize that if you do start with spoon feeding and puree feeding, it's important to progress in texture. And so something I like to do with parents who have 6-month-old babies is get them to close their eyes and envision that first birthday party. After the cake smash, you're going to sit down, you're going to have a family meal, and it's going to be a bite-sized piece and everyone is going to be eating the same thing. Your baby's food is going to be small and it's going to be soft. And so whether you start with baby-led weaning or with puree feeding, it ends up sort of looking the same. We just get there a bit differently. That being said, baby-led weaning, I think the term itself is really confusing. I know in the beginning, I was super snobby and I wrote it off because I was like, it just took me 4 months to establish breastfeeding. I'm not ready to wean. But actually baby-led weaning, what it is sort of representing, or the meaning behind it, is that the first time your baby puts solid food into their mouth, they're starting that journey of weaning off of breast milk or formula. And in baby-led weaning, at the very heart of it is this idea that the infant is self-feeding right from the start, and that it's not the caregiver placing food into the baby's mouth. So it could look like that quintessential sort of image we see on social media of a baby holding a drumstick and bringing it to their mouth, or a large piece of soft broccoli. But it could also be a parent spoon, loading up a spoon with, say, infant cereal and the baby holding it and self-feeding. So the whole idea is it's the baby that's in charge of directing that experience from the start.
I love that framing of it, actually, because I think that one of the things, I mean, like, so this is a great example. Like Sheila didn't do baby-led weaning, I did. And so there's like so much diversity in how parents feed their kids. And I think potentially like a lot of place for shame when it comes to feeding too. So I'm glad that you just reframed it in that way. Can you tell us a bit about the evidence behind baby-led weaning and what it looks like in terms of support for or against?
I mean, we know that baby-led weaning is appropriate for most babies and infants, but there are certain infants where it's not the primary goal. And so this is in cases where maybe baby lives with a genetic syndrome, or maybe they were born prematurely, or maybe they are really hypotonic in their oral muscles. So in that case, yeah, we might get there eventually, but typically these babies also have additional feeding support, maybe occupational therapists on board to help find, a way of feeding that is going to really work well for them. But in general, when it comes to sort of the evidence. It is an absolutely safe way to feed babies. Babies can thrive using this approach. We do want to be mindful, however, of one of those key nutrients, and I think we're going to spend a lot of time on it, and that's iron. And I think one of the risks is that these babies may not be getting adequate iron intake. And I think the reality is out in the wild, parents are not sticking to one feeding approach. They're probably mixing the two together. So a lot of parents who say, I'm doing baby-led weaning, they're probably also feeding their baby cereal or some applesauce or purees to kind of help fill in those nutrient gaps. And that's certainly what I encourage parents to do, is to think of a more blended approach where, it's not totally black and white, and getting them a bit more comfortable with the nuance of being in the gray.
That's actually a good point, because when I think back to like what my baby-led weaning journey was, we actually still for breakfast every morning fed our kids iron fortified cereal for that exact reason. So I'm glad that you mentioned that.
Yeah. I was always nervous with the baby-led weaning concept because of that picture in my mind of the baby holding the drumstick and choke risk. And so can you walk us through a little bit about that? Because I think that's where a lot of parents are nervous to sort of hand over the wheel to the baby in that moment. Because is there a higher risk of choking with baby-led weaning? Because that's kind of what a lot of parents in my practice ask me that too.
Yeah, I mean, the evidence suggests that no, it is actually, there is no higher risk. However, the caveat is in some of these studies, it was the groups of parents that had education on how to safely do this at home. And there's one particular study, it's called the BLISS study, BLISS, and it kind of shows that, when you look at the babies who started off with purees versus the babies who started off with handheld or baby-led weaning foods, there was no difference in choking incident. And in fact, the kids who started with baby-led weaning, when you brought them in and reassessed them, they were actually gagging a lot less than the kids who started with purees, who are now working on those more challenging textures.
When we talk about starting solids, and we are going to get into kind of the iron piece, but even if we go a step back from there, there's a lot of conflicting advice on like what the first foods people should feed their children, when to introduce allergens safely and effectively. So can you tell us a little bit more about kind of that approach when you're starting to introduce new foods and solids?
I feel like we're getting into all the scary stuff, like choking.
Let's do it.
This
is what we do on the show. We actually scare our listeners sometimes, but we give them the information as to why not to be scared.
Yeah. You know what? We'll start off with the allergens. I mean, I'm really excited about this landscape because we have some really great research and really cool studies. So right now, what parents need to know is that they no longer need to delay the introduction of highly allergenic foods. I mean, we're here in Canada, so there's a top 11 list. And of that top 11, I find that the vast majority of people end up being either allergic to milk, peanut, or eggs. However, the key message needs to be that the odds are in your favor. Most kids don't actually walk around with an allergy, right? And it's very rare that an allergic reaction would have a really devastating impact. So I certainly don't want the fear of allergies to prevent parents from, following through with the recommendation, which is early and often. So right around 6 months, when your baby starts solids, start to introduce these allergens, and often is, up for interpretation, but generally we're recommending 2 to 3 times a week. But I think you need to prioritize it in a way that makes sense. And it might seem really hard, but I'm thinking of the breakfast my kids had today. They had wheat, eggs, and dairy. And so it's very easy to repeat. And the other thing to keep in mind is if your baby is categorized as being high risk for an allergy, which, might be something that you're uncovering with your physician might have a recommendation that you start even a little bit earlier, because some of that evidence is pointing towards, getting these babies introduced somewhere between that 4 to 6 month mark.
That's what we do in our practice. So when because we have a large pediatric practice in family medicine, and we actually recommend starting at 4 to 6 months to introduce the allergens, and go to the bulk food store, pick up a bit of the different nut butters, do that, and then basically introduce them fairly quickly. And I like that list of 11 that you mentioned, because that's very helpful to give direction to specific allergens to look out for. And then, but when I was in med school, we would say delay introduction of allergens until 1 year. And so that's a big shift in how we teach about allergen introduction and reducing the risk of future allergies. So I appreciate that. That's part of your world that you share as well.
And I mean, some parents already are well aware that their baby's allergic to something because they're on, a very hydrolyzed formula at 6 months. So I think their journey with solids looks a little bit differently. They might take it a little bit slower. But the allergy landscape is super exciting. You know, I'm hopeful that we'll have less and less kids out in the world that don't have to live with these life-threatening allergens.
Yeah. And when you talk about prioritizing different types of foods to start with, what do you go to? Because I think there's sort of like, do you start with the cereal? Do you start with meat? Do you have an order that you recommend for those who may eat meat, for example? Is there a specific order, or do you keep it fairly flexible?
Yeah, I keep it fairly flexible. I think parents need to tune in and assess, like, in a week, what are we eating? Zone in on all the iron containing and iron-rich foods and focus on offering those. So if you are an omnivorous family and you do eat meat such as beef is a great first food to offer your baby. And then if you are a vegetarian family, or maybe you're following a vegan lifestyle, then baby cereal is also a fantastic option. But the key is variety. You're not going to just be offering these foods every single day, but just trying to understand and wrap your head around, like, well, what foods actually offer my baby iron? And so beyond beef, dark meat, certain fish, there's a little bit in eggs, and then my favorite food group, and it was my son's first food, was lentils and beans, also are wonderful sources of iron as well.
That's great.
Let's get right into iron. So you mentioned a bunch of foods that are good sources of iron. When should parents think about starting to make sure that their child or their infant is receiving enough iron? And what are your thoughts on kind of iron supplementation versus focusing on food-rich sources of iron? And how should parents look at that balance?
Yeah, I we talk a lot about iron, and I'm so passionate about it because I've just learned so much about what happens when the body doesn't get enough. And what's interesting is in infancy, that first 1,000 days, we really view iron as a critical nutrient. I mean, there's so much growth and development taking place. We don't want to miss the mark on this. So I really encourage parents, like, when you start with solids, like, try your best to offer these iron containing foods at every meal. And you might even want to offer 2 per meal as you're introducing and adding in more and more foods. I generally follow suit with like our Canadian health recommendations, which is, maybe we don't need to supplement with iron, but if you are concerned about how much you're taking, or perhaps if the birth mom was also deficient in iron, or there's other risk factors, it might not be a bad idea to have baby tested and then supplement. I mean, we also know that iron isn't something you want to supplement nilly-willy, because too much is also not great and good for the body. But iron is important. And even as a parent of kids that are 6 and 8, like, I never lose sight of how important iron is for them.
When should parents start considering focusing on iron, kind of as soon as solids are introduced?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I usually bring it up again with my friends who have daughters that are preteen and, entering menstruation. I just said to a friend, I'm like, oh, so what have you changed about her nutrition now that she needs almost twice as much iron? And, she kind of just gave me a blank look. But I think it's a question we have to ask ourselves, because the statistic is 1 in 4. So we have some work to do around this area.
So similar to iron supplementation or getting enough iron in your diet, can you tell us a little bit about vitamin D supplementation recommendations and what the evidence is currently for infants and toddlers and older kids?
Yeah, for sure. So we definitely want infants 0 to 12 months getting at least that 400 international units. So most families usually are already administering a little vitamin D drop. My physician is also South Asian, so he encouraged me to do 800 units because we've got that darker melanated skin. So I think the recommendations also vary country to country depending on where you are. But certainly we're here in the Northern Hemisphere, so vitamin D is really, really important. And then for some parents, depending on if they are formula feeding, the formula will have vitamin D in it, but we generally still encourage that 400 international units because as your baby is growing, they're actually going to be consuming less and less of that volume. And really, like a glass of milk at 12 months isn't going to cut it for vitamin D.
Actually, that's a good reminder of a question that I had. So milk, cow's milk and iron. So can you tell us more about that? And I mean, because that is something certainly that we counsel our patients in our clinical practices about how too much cow's milk can lead to iron deficiency. So can you talk to us a bit more about that?
Yeah. So, if we get down to the science, if we reflect a little bit on like what one of the key nutrients are in dairy foods and in milk, it's calcium, which is great. We all need calcium to develop a healthy skeletal system. But when too much milk overcrowds overall intake, what happens is it displaces the opportunity for your baby to learn to eat and consume iron-rich foods. And I don't know about the two of you, but like I have a fridge full of like different varieties of yogurt, cheese, milk. We have like yogurt tubes, yogurt drinks, you
so
name
much
it.
Dairy.
We've got. So, your toddler or your older child's probably going to grow up to enjoy, dairy foods. But I would argue that, certainly in the work that I do one-on-one with clients, kids are having a hard time learning to eat and accept iron-rich foods. So make sure that you're including all foods. We want a variety, but do I think that a bowl of yogurt should be the very first food that your baby's eating at 6 months? Like, probably not. Focus on iron-containing foods and then add those in gradually to complement intake. But yes, those are our milk babies, and they're often the ones that are, higher risk for iron deficiency anemia.
For sure.
Right. I always have that conversation with patients, like parents in my practice, because they appear very healthy, right? Because they are sort of thriving on they're thriving on the milk and the dairy products, and then they tell me that they're having like 6 to 8 glasses of milk a day. And I'm like, okay, we should check the iron. So do you have a number? Because we tend to recommend like less than 24 ounces of milk per day once they hit that 1 year.
Same.
Yeah, okay.
16, anywhere between that 16 to 24 ounces is fine. I mean, I think if you've got a more selective eater who's having a tougher time making their way towards solid foods, you could try to bring it down a little bit and see if it helps impart a larger appetite for solids. So you have some wiggle room for sure.
That's great.
Okay, this is, I think, a topic that probably a lot of parents want to hear about, and that's like fussy and picky eaters. So can you, and I'm sure you get asked about this a lot, Nita. So can you tell us kind of like what is developmentally normal for picky eating? When does it become a concern? And are there ways to prevent your child from being a picky eater?
Yeah. So, it's such a big topic. I mean, certainly I think there's this like interesting transitional period that happens like around 12 to 18 months. Maybe parents get a ride until 24 months. And that's usually when a toddler becomes a little bit more opinionated and selective about what they want to eat. Whereas like most parents are in this glory phase, 6 to 12 months, where, their baby might be slow and steady, but generally willing to eat a lot of foods, or they might be really adventurous and then boom, it stops. But I think it's important for parents to understand that there's a lot of development that's taking place that's driving this. So number one, your baby tried to triple their birth weight in that first year, but after age 1, that growth rate, it's still high, but they're not growing at that same rate. So they don't have that same sort of biological drive to just eat in the way that they did. And then secondly, psychologically, they have this really important psychosocial need to be a lot more independent, practice autonomy. They want to relate to others in the world, and they want to make some choices. And toddlers don't get to make very many choices, but they can certainly decide if they're going to eat a food or if they're going to reject it. And so I think sometimes it's helpful to know why this is happening, because then you can like, number one, expect it, but then recognize like, okay, it is sort of, a part of the norm. Most parents experience this like fussy eating stage where kids like hang on to food jags and they let go of them. But generally I find it does get better by age 6, but ages like 1 to 6, that's a really long time. And so it's what parents do in the 5 years that could really dictate, what a child's long-term feeding relationship is going to look like. So a feeding philosophy we're big fans of, and maybe you've learned about it. It's Ellen Satter's The Division of Responsibility, which, I too have fallen on the hands and knees of this feeding philosophy. And so the idea behind this is, you as a parent, you decide, what you're going to serve. You're going to be kind and considerate, but you don't need to cater. You'll decide where it's going to be served, and what, and then when, in terms of the timing. So timing is really important because I think if we're entering these patterns of like all day grazing, it is going to definitely impact appetite for larger, more balanced meals. So parents decide what, when, and where. And then the hardest part is actually being comfortable with, the roles and responsibilities of our child, which is they got to decide if they're going to eat and how much they're going to eat. And that's where the tension lies, is because it's often the parent who has an opinion of, how much their child, should be eating. And that's where those more counterintuitive feeding practices come, like, you'd mentioned finish the plate with something you grew up with, or we're building out reward systems, or even like punishment if a child hasn't finished their plate, or withholding something fun from them because they haven't eaten.
And that's a big one. So like a lot of times parents will say, I just don't know if they're getting enough in. So how do you define what's enough when you're counseling parents? Because I imagine that's a big question for you, especially when you're working with kids who may struggle to have that variety that we're hoping for, or finishing what's given to them.
Yeah, Sheila's such an annoying answer, but it's trust.
Okay.
It's a bit of a leap of faith, and trusting that your child is getting what they need and not narrowing in on just one particular meal time, right? What did they have earlier in the day? What about at snack? And there's also that difference between like, okay, what is optimal intake versus nutritional adequacy, right? And so I think it's really important to consider that. And if anything, like maybe that liberates some parents from a bit of that pressure. But ultimately, there are other indicators that will help you determine if your child's getting enough or not enough, which is the growth chart. So those regular visits with your physician is super important. And then, if you are concerned at any point, if you're worried, reach out to a registered dietitian, or, have that discussion with your healthcare provider so that you do feed from a place of confidence. Because I think if you're existing and feeding from a place of fear, it's just going to suck. Mealtime is not going to be pleasant. And the three of us know it's a marathon. Like, we're trying to make it to 20,000 meals by the time they're 18. That doesn't even include snacks. And so, something at Happy Healthy Eaters we talk about a lot is like, there's so much talk about attachment and healthy attachment, but actually feeding is a ritual, and it is an attachment ritual. There's so much that takes place, and there is a definite hierarchy where it's the parent and then it's the child, right? And that relationship is going to ebb and flow as our kids get older, and there's going to be a bit of that give and take, but it boils down a lot to trust.
I really love the way that you've laid that out. One of the questions that I'm sure Sheila gets this as well, and I suspect that you do, Nita, as well. So kids who are picky eaters, do they need to have a multivitamin supplement?
I think it depends. Like you have to kind of assess, are they missing an entire food group? So if a child had no dairy intake, then I might consider some more creative ways to get them calcium or those B vitamins, or so a calcium supplement might be a good idea. And then certainly like some children who are not interested in foods that do offer them iron, and they're not interested in even the fortified foods, then I might look at, getting iron status looked at and then supplementing appropriately. But again, iron is one of those tricky ones where I really like to have some lab work done before recommending something.
We check iron quite a bit in our practice, actually, because it is one of those things that kids will display. Like they don't get to the level sometimes of like pica where they're eating dirt and ice, but they are just tired compared to their classmates. They're falling asleep more easily, and that's something we love when our kids sleep. But if they're really lethargic, then we need to look at iron as well. And so we tend to check iron, and getting your kids' blood work is not always easy, but it can be very valuable to let us know, do we need to supplement a little bit more? And as you said, even for those preteen kids, it's really important.
And so I'm hearing from both of you, like more targeted supplementation based on individual context versus a multivitamin for all picky eaters.
Yeah.
One of our big things that Shaz and I like to do is also sort of tackle misinformation on the podcast. And I'm sure that you get lots of questions on social media from your friends and family members. Like, what are the most common nutrition myths or popular feeding trends that you see about infant and child feeding?
I mean, certainly like a big trend I'm seeing, and I never thought I'd live to see the day, was carnivore babies. Like I'm shocked about this, but yeah, there are like groups of parents who think it's reasonable to raise a carnivore baby. And so I find that really fascinating. But, the key takeaway is you don't need to do that. It's important that babies get introduced to a wide range of foods and plant foods, like fruits and vegetables. These are really important. We know 90% of Canadians aren't meeting fruit and veggie guidelines. We're struggling to meet fiber requirements, and we're seeing that in disease outcomes. So, I don't recommend the carnivore diet. I don't know why this trend is taking over, but
because everybody's iron deficient.
Yeah.
So they're like, go the carnivore way.
Yeah. And then certainly like other misconceptions, I think parents are like so confused when they're at the grocery store, and I don't blame them. Like even sometimes I look at that cracker aisle, or I'm like looking through the yogurts, and I'm like, which way is the wind going to flow this day? What am I going to pick? And so I think that's really, really challenging for parents. And a lot of parents are struggling with just making ends meet with inflation and the cost of food. So a misconception often is that organic food is superior to conventionally grown food. And as someone who has a huge passion for agriculture, and I've like traveled farms across the world now, I just want parents to know that we're in the golden years of food production in Canada. There's so much to be grateful for. And, whether you choose conventional or organic, you're mostly just paying a premium price. But in terms of nutrition, there's almost no difference. And you don't have to worry about feeding your baby pesticides. That's really not happening, despite some of the sensationalized claims that you see out on the media.
Thank you for saying that. In the kind of the same vein, so there's a lot of information out there on social media when it comes to food and feeding kids. So I want to end here before we get into our true false, which I think you're going to love, on added sugar and ultra processed foods, because boy, is there a lot of information out there about these two things. So let's start with added sugar. So what does the evidence say about kind of added sugar, when it should be introduced, in what amounts, and like how bad is it really?
Please tell us that it's not too bad, because our kids are like fully into sugar.
I think one of the things, so if we want to get into sort of the recommendation, the World Health Organization is encouraging us to limit added sugar to no more than 5 to 10% of a child's caloric intake. So for a toddler, that's about 15 to 30 grams of sugar. For context, that's like 1 tablespoon is about 12.5 grams of sugar. So that's the recommendation. But I think what we also need to understand is from a lot of the data that I've been reading, like the Canadian Sugar Institute, they provide me with a little bit of information, is overall we have been reducing our sugar intake. So that is positive. The second thing to keep in mind is with sugar and kids, you want to approach it in a way where you're not creating a scarcity mindset, because what happens is when we restrict, then children become disinhibited and then they just seek out those foods even more. And we want to really raise a generation of children who can eat intuitively and listen to their own cues and stop when they've had enough. And so I think in our household, like I'm an all foods fit dietitian. We enjoy all of the foods like ice cream. I love baking cookies, but it doesn't make up their whole intake. It's there to complement the rest of it. And I think, again, like the three of us are South Asian, like how much is food wrapped up in like just joy, like the joy of eating. And those are
Food
foods
is
that
love.
often are joyful. But that being said, I think, the conversation there around sugar, we just need to be mindful of the language. So you don't have to tell your child it's bad, they're going to get diabetes, or you better brush your teeth extra hard today because we had candy. Like we can keep the language neutral, and that can sometimes really support them in forming a much more positive relationship with those foods.
Can you tell us a little bit about ultra processed foods? Because like life is busy. You're navigating busy schedules, getting your kids to their activities, and it's just easy to give them a granola bar or something and go. So can you help us navigate that a bit around finding that balance of processed foods and our lives that are just busy?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I want to add before I get into that nuance is a lot of people don't recognize that processed foods are a result of the feminist movement. So when women decided to get jobs and go to work, someone needed to prepare dinner and they needed quick dinner. So it was sort of catered to men. And sometimes we lose sight of that. So, I am like a proud feminist. And so I think one of the things is like recognizing like it's like where it sort of came from can be really supportive. And the other part is sort of identifying that sort of, how is each family going to really strike a balance? And so I know for me, sometimes when we do have, boxed craft dinner, that's actually like buys me time to make a much more balanced and hearty salad. Or when I pick up a rotisserie chicken, which to some degree has also been processed, it allows me to sort of, make the rest of the quesadilla or the rest of the soup. And so I think for parents, it's really important to, yes, get in the kitchen, do some home cooking. But if you have to rely a little bit on some processed foods, like be okay with it and try to see if you can do a bit of give and take where I'm buying this. So maybe I'm going to try to do this as well. And honestly, everyone's just trying to do their best, me included. Like we're all just trying to do our best when it comes to feeding our families. But it's tough out there. I'm not gonna say that it's not tough.
I think, this is a good wrap up to like the formal part of the podcast before we get to the true and false, because it's all about balance, right? Like nobody can be perfect, whether it's like in how you start feeding your child versus, the busy, chaotic schedules that we as moms have with our kids. For me, that's certainly going to be the take home. I love that you've framed things in a way that is just, we're all just trying to do our best, right? So.
So our favorite way of ending our podcast episodes is to do a quick true or false with our guests.
I don't know, why am I nervous about this?
Oh no, you're gonna be great. It's it'll be good. Yeah, it's very straightforward. It kind of touches upon some of the things that we've already gone through, and if there's anything that you want to add. So, can we start our true and false segment? Okay. Yeah. So true or false? Baby-led weaning increases the risk of choking compared with spoon feeding.
False.
That's a nice false period, because you already talked about that earlier in the episode. I like that. Okay, so true or false? Purees delay a baby's ability to self-feed.
False.
True or false? Iron supplements cause harmful constipation in most babies and toddlers.
I mean, it's true. It can, but it's false in that it's not harmful, but it can cause constipation.
As a side note, is there a difference in the amount of constipation caused between like dietary sources of iron versus iron supplements?
Iron supplements for sure more.
Okay, next one. True or false? Kids can safely consume small amounts of added sugar before age 1.
Actually, false. It's
Can you
zero.
tell us-
Recommended
Yeah,
zero
tell us more about that.
Yeah, it's recommended to not offer any added sugar until age 2. I think people are confused about what is added versus natural sugar. So I'm not talking about the lactose in milk or the natural sugar in an orange or a banana. I'm talking about orange juice, honey, maple syrup, just table sugar is not recommended. And the reason is because, again, it just crowds out their opportunity to get in the nutrients they need, like zinc, iron, healthy fats. There just isn't room yet. So I found that really easy when I had my first kid. But then by the time I had my second, my older one was already a toddler who loved ice cream. So, I think my youngest got a bit of more of that early exposure to sugar. So that's the recommendation. Parents, do the best that you can do.
It's funny that you say that because I had the exact same experience, like down to like we were making homemade ketchup for our firstborn because we were so diligent about not having added sugar. And then
that's commitment.
When we had our second, I'm like, well, our firstborn is having all the things already, right? So like, it's not really fair for us to withhold it from our second. And so we tried to be still very, very mindful of it, but like certainly not to the level that we were doing it when we had way more time, less busy lives, and only one child.
Yeah, each child gets a different introduction, it feels like.
Yes.
So true or false? Toddlers who regularly drink more than 500 mils of cow's milk per day have a higher risk of iron deficiency.
500 to 750 ml is okay, so that's false.
All right, and last one, true or false? Introducing lumpy textures later than 9 to 10 months increases the likelihood of long-term picky eating.
True. Yeah.
So introduce it earlier.
We want babies to get to finger foods. We call it the window of opportunity, which is around that 9 to 10 month mark. And there's some hypotheses where if we miss that mark, then these babies have more issues with problem feeding down the road. So, again, that's why I went to that sort of like close your eyes, envision that first birthday, and you're all having bite-sized pieces of the same food.
Nita, this has been so wonderful. I'm thinking of my kids' next meal and how to do things a little bit differently. I'm probably going to call you to figure out how to get salad into their meals more. But thank you so much, because as Shaz said, the way that you're approaching feeding our kids is really quite beautiful. It is shame-free. It's understanding the busyness of parents' lives and done in such a beautiful way that allows us to give us a little bit of grace to feel like we're doing okay. So thank you for the approach that you take, because I know that's there's so much pressure on families to feed their kids, and the cost of living is high and food insecurity is high. And so being able to approach this in such an open way makes such a big difference. So thank you so much for that.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm so glad we could do this.
And how do people find you?
You can find me at Happy Healthy Eaters. That's the Instagram handle. You could visit us at happyhealthyeaters.com. And then I also maintain a private practice in my province in Manitoba. So you can find me at Nita_Sharda. And that's a bit more of like an inside scoop of like my day-to-day life over there.
Great. Thank you. A reminder that the Doc Talk is for general information purposes only. This podcast is not intended to replace medical advice from your doctor. While we are doctors, we are not your doctor. Always speak to your own healthcare provider for questions related to your personal health needs. And of course, please be sure to follow us on social media at the Doc Talk Pod. And please like and subscribe. It really does help us with our reach as well. Thanks for tuning in today.